Hello and welcome to a live Deprogrammed with Keri Smith. I'm your host, Keri, and my microphone's not working. I'm going to have to get a new microphone before Monday. So I'm using the backup mic and it's going to sound different. And I apologize. If you're a sound person, then you are going to be very upset and you probably don't want to listen to this episode. I apologize. But otherwise, for everyone else, I'll just pretend like it's one of the ones I do on the road with the backup mic. Hello, afternoon. John Thomas says Rumble is not working. Is that true? I don't know why that would be happening. Let me see. My apologies. Well, it says it is, but that's on my end. So I'm just going to get into the topic. There's nothing I can do about it. I'll try and figure it out later, John. They say, oh, okay, there it goes. It was delayed. Okay. So again, apologies about the microphone. This started last week. My fancy mic just went out. So I've got to get a new one before Monday, and I'm just going to use the travel mic. And I apologize in advance for the sound quality. Thanks for being here. Those of you who were able to see it, I didn't do a show Friday because I did not do a show. What is today? Today's Friday. I did not do a show this past Monday because I was getting ready. I was getting ready to go on the road. And I had to go to New York last minute. And they asked me to come to, it was Epic Times has like this sister company, NTD News. Some of you may know them because they did really great coverage during the COVID years. That's when my husband started watching them, and I started reading a lot of Epic Times during the COVID years. And this producer reached out and said, do you want to come talk about election results and shoot this other thing as well? And I said, yeah, sure. So I got there, and let me just tell you this little bit. For anybody who struggles with doing things that are outside of your comfort zone, if you're a believer, I don't know how it works if you're a non-believer, but if you're a believer and you do that thing that you're afraid of doing, a lot of times I think God is maybe trying to teach you that to have faith that he's there with you. Because once I got there, I had not slept. I had to get up at like 3 a.m. or something to go to the airport. And I got there and I saw the topics and I thought, I can't do this. I'm used to talking about culture and ideology, and I talk about politics, but downstream from culture. And my friends, Brahmabul and Mad, had helped me, get comfortable with the election topics ahead of time. Much thanks to them. But when I saw the topics, I had a panic attack. I thought I was going to throw up. I called my husband. I was crying like a woman. I said, I made a big mistake. I'm laughing now, but at the time it seemed like the world was ending. And I said, I made a big mistake. I only say things, I know I talk a lot, clearly I have a show, but I only say things that I feel are worth saying. And I only say things that I care about and things that I think are true. And so I was looking at this thinking, this isn't my forte. I don't have anything of valuable to add to the election results. And so I almost punked out. And then I talked to the producer, and let me tell you, they have some of the best people working there. This woman's name, by the way, she's a believer. Her name's Grace. What a beautiful name. And she said, you're not supposed to be an expert on all these things. We're going to ask you about the things you know about, the cultural topics. Like we know who you are. We watch your show. That's why you're here. And so I went ahead and just did it, and it was fine. It ended up being fine. I thought I was going to get up and run out of the state, and it was okay. So it was a big learning lesson for me. I've had that happen before. I don't actually like public speaking. The first couple times I ever did theater shows, like where I moderated a panel or I spoke on a panel where you can see the people, you can see the audience. Same thing happened then. And it reminded me of that, that happened back then too. And it happened the first time I ever did a podcast. I felt that way. So when you're afraid, you can just keep going. If you're a believer, just trust that it's not about you. It's not you anyway. It's not your own will or your own smarts or your own anything. It's, God's like, I got you. And so that was a big learning lesson for me. And yeah, so anyway, that was a great trip. It ended up being a great trip because the next day they did this 1 hour interview with me that's going to be airing soon, I guess. I'll let you guys know when. And that was more about the stuff I'm used to talking about here on Deprogrammed, which is about why are young people drawn into the leftist cult? Why are they drawn into woke ideology? And we talked a little bit about the New York City election results as well that day. So that's going to be coming out soon. And the other thing is I got to see my friend James Lindsay, which is great. I brought him a copy of the book, The Imitation of Christ, which my husband and I read together about a year ago. And I talked about it back then, but if you haven't read this book, it's great. Even if you're not a believer, I think you'll get something out of it. It was written in the 1300s or the 1400s, and it was written by this monk who gave up. He came from a wealthy family, gave up all of his possessions and money and everything to join the monastery. But then they thought he had a way with people and a way with talking. And so he left the monastery and went out and, started working with people. And he wrote this book. He was sort of building a community of godly men, of strong men. And it's a book of biblical wisdom and scripture. And it's aimed at everybody, but I would say specifically at men in some ways. And it's about the fruits of the Spirit and having faith, and it's full of scripture, and it's very short. So it's like jam-packed with meaning, but a really quick read, and I highly recommend reading it. I had never heard of it until we found it in a used bookstore a year ago. And it actually, I don't know if this is true, but according to Wikipedia, it says it's the most read Christian book outside of the Bible. It's been around since the 1400s. So it's a very widely read book. I had just never read it. So that was really nice to see him, to talk about faith and God and all the crazy stuff going on in the world, Marxism, the New York results, that kind of stuff. It was wonderful to meet the Epoch Times staff. And they gave me this 2 books. It's a 2-volume set, and it's about the history of communism. And I just started reading it on the plane and coming back, and it's incredible. It's almost written, I would say, at least the preface is written from a Christian point of view. And I can't wait to get into this book. As I read it, I'll let you guys know more about it. But yeah, it ended up being a good trip. And yeah, it's good to be back though. It's good to be back. I got some sleep. It's good to see my husband. My mother-in-law is here. I've just been baking pasties. That's why we started late. So trying to get back into the Texas swing of things. But let's talk about what happened in New York. So that's why I went up there. So New York City elected a socialist. And despite what people are saying, a lot of people are talking about how this is a mandate for him or a mandate for New York City. But if you look at the numbers, so this is a city of 8.5 million people. More than 2 million people voted, and they keep talking about how that was a record high number of voters, like the most they had seen in a mayoral race in decades. So it's like maybe almost a fourth of the people voted, and that's high turnout. So around 2 million people voted. Mamdani got like 1 million votes, 1 million and some change. Cuomo got 854,000 and some change. They're still counting, but these are the projections of where it's going to end up, the final numbers. Sliwa got 146,000 and some change. If you add up the votes for Cuomo and Sliwa, like if you look at the non-Mamdani votes, it's neck and neck. It's like 1 million for Mamdani, 1 million against Mamdani. So in the end, he won by he still had a margin of like 35,000 votes more than the non-Mamdani votes, but it's a much smaller margin. If you think about that, like 35,000 people decided. At least I was thinking about that today. 35,000 people decided. And this is a city of 8.5 million. And that's pretty incredible. There was a lot of commentary before the election about how Sliwa should drop out and his votes would go to Cuomo. But, you know, if you add up all the votes he got to Cuomo's, it's still 35,000 votes shy. I didn't want him to drop out. I know that's an unpopular view, but I don't believe in voting for someone like Cuomo, who was horrible on COVID policy, who, you know, put COVID patients in nursing homes and then tried to cover up the deaths that caused. I just think he's not all that different from someone who's just an avowed socialist. This is the way I view it anyway. And so I was glad Sliwa stayed in. When I got there, I had another great conversation. My Uber driver on the drive there, after I landed, it's about an hour drive, and this guy was awesome. And we were just talking about the election and everything. And he was voting for Sliwa, and he's a legal immigrant from Peru. And he was talking about how things have gotten a lot more unsafe. And I was asking, are the subways really unsafe? Because those of us outside of New York, you know, I used to live there. I lived there for a year, but now I only ever go back on very quick trips. So I don't really know what it's like now. And so I said, if you're outside of the city, all you see are the bad stories. When something bad happens, is it really that unsafe? And he said, yes. He said, yes, it's terrible. He said, and the only reason I care is because, you know, I care about my wife's safety and my daughters. He said he has 2 daughters. And I said, well, what about, would you ever consider moving out of New York? Like if he won, if Mamdani won, would you consider moving? And he said, I've already been looking. He said he's already been making plans to move his family out. And I know this is just one story. It's just one anecdote, but I thought it was a really interesting conversation. He was a really smart guy, and we had a great talk. I also talked with another woman who is another legal immigrant from Argentina. And she was telling me she was not for Mamdani, but she would not consider moving because she has so much family there. And so those are the 2, like, you know, everyday people I kind of talked to just to see what they thought about things. And yeah, it was an interesting trip. So let's look at this cover of the New York Post. This is how the New York Post reported it. And it's Mamdani holding up the communism symbol, and it says, on your marks. I love this headline. Whoever wrote this, you know, I like puns. So on your marks, get set, Zo, Socialist Mamdani wins race for mayor. And the big headline is the red apple. So I wish I had picked some of these up while I was there, because apparently these sold out very quickly, and they're already on eBay now for like $350 or something. If you want to get a copy of one of these New York Post covers, this cover that's probably going to go down in history, unfortunately. Let's look at the New York Times. So the New York Times has the results broken down. You can see here what I was talking about, you know, about 1 million for Mamdani, Cuomo, 854,000, Sliwa, 146,000. And then they have it broken down by neighborhood. And this was kind of interesting. My husband and I each have lived in New York before we knew each other at different periods of our life. And so he couldn't see this. And I was reading some of it to him, and I just started naming neighborhoods to see if he could guess how did they go. And he was nailing it. He knew, you know, so Upper East Side went for Cuomo. Upper West Side went for Mamdani. Bed-Stuy went big for Mamdani. Crown Heights, Williamsburg, of course, Mamdani. Washington Heights, Mamdani. I started naming some of the others, like Sheepshead Bay and Flushing, and some of the places that are more like Italian. And he's like, oh no, that's Cuomo. And he was nailing it. But you can go down and look at all the neighborhoods and see how they voted. which is pretty interesting. Coney Island went for Cuomo. So one of the things they were talking to me about at NTD News was, why are young people voting for something like this? Like, why would young people in particular be attracted to an outright socialist? And there's a couple things there. Number one, yes, I know he calls himself a democratic socialist, but he's just putting a modifier on there because it's socialism. There's nothing. If somebody can explain to me the difference between socialism and democratic socialism, I'd like to hear a good definition, a good explanation from someone, because no one's ever done that for me. If you look at their website, the DSA, it's straight up socialism. They view capitalism as theft. In fact, Mamdani has said capitalism is theft, which is crazy. It's almost psychopathic. It's a reversal, because socialism is actually literally theft. That's where you take things that belong to some people and give it to other people. That's where the government, which is basically enforced with, men with guns, that's where by force the government takes the fruits of your labor and gives it to other people. That is literally theft. But so they say capitalism is theft. They want to destroy capitalism. And it's interesting because there's this poll. I'm sure some of you heard about it right before we went into this election. November 1st. This is Axios reporting on this poll, but there were lots of places that reported on it. College students prefer socialism to capitalism. And let me just read the beginning. Socialism beats capitalism among U.S. college students in a new Axios Generation Lab poll. 67% of survey respondents, these are college kids, say that they hold a positive or neutral view of the word socialism. 67, almost 70% of college age people, compared with 40% with the word capitalism. So only 40% of college students have a positive or neutral view of capitalism, but almost 70% have a positive or neutral view of socialism. And they were asking me, why is this the case? Well, there's a couple reasons. For decades now, the universities have been indoctrinating young people to hate capitalism, to hate the West, to hate men, to hate white people, to hate heterosexuality, to hate God. Like, there's a whole list of things. And this has been going on for a while. I was indoctrinated into all this stuff in the late 90s. It just ramped up after I left. And then it made its way into K through 12 education. So kids are getting hit with this at a younger and younger age. So that's one thing. The other thing is that they're not teaching kids history. I went to 2 very good schools. So I think I got a better education than average. I went to a science and math boarding school and had an excellent education there, and had a really great history teacher, but it was U.S. history. I didn't really get a good education on communism throughout history. And then I went to Duke University, which is a great school. Didn't get any kind of education on the history of communism. So it wasn't until I started looking into a lot of this stuff myself in my late 30s, when I was leaving woke, that I started to understand all that I didn't know, and still don't know a lot, to be honest. And so these kids aren't learning basic history. They're also not learning economics. They don't understand how things work. And so a lot of them, when they hear a politician like Mamdani, who is very charismatic, he smiles all the time. He smiles even when people in the debate are insulting him. He's smiling. He's got that affability and stuff nailed. He's very charming, which doesn't mean anything about your character. It just means you're charming. There are serial killers who are very charming. Ted Bundy was one of them. There are sociopaths and dictators throughout history who've been very charismatic. In the hands of a person with a bad character, it can be a very dangerous thing to be charismatic. So, but I will say that he is very charismatic. And then, so you've got this charismatic person who's coming out and he's talking to a generation of people who are looking at the situation we're in right now, where our country is so far in debt. The dollar is worth less every year. Our government keeps printing more money, which makes your dollar worth even less. Our taxes get higher every year. Back when we first introduced the income tax in, I should have looked up the date. It was 1914 or 1919, sometime in between that. If you go back and look at the history of that, when the United States first introduced the income tax and said, we're going to start taxing your income, they promised, these politicians back then promised the American people, they promised us in the future as well. If you think about what that means, the politicians promised that the income tax would never be higher than 1%. And look at where it's at now. So the government keeps taking more of the fruits of our labor. The government has become outsized. The government is doing things with our money that's not in the domain of government. Taking more and more of our money, building a larger bureaucratic state to be able to run all these programs that are not the responsibility of government. It is not the government's responsibility. It's not their domain to do healthcare. It's not their domain. This will be controversial, but I don't think education is their domain. It's their domain. The federal government is supposed to use our taxes to defend us, to have an army, to protect the border. They've gotten into all of these things. If you talk to libertarians, they can speak to this better than I can, but think about any kind of basic transaction you do. Like if you and I make an agreement that I am going to give you money, the fruits of my labors, and in exchange for that, you're going to cut my hair. The government's like, not so fast. We're going to get a cut of that transaction because you need to have this license and you need to have this and you need to, they have their fingers in everything. And that's not what the founders intended. So you've got this young generation who they're looking at the state of things. The dollar's not worth very much anymore. It's continually worth less because the Federal Reserve, we keep printing more money. We're taxed beyond comprehension when it was, the income tax was first introduced, and we're paying. The justification is that we have to pay for all these things. Look at all the stuff Doge cut, all the ridiculous stuff we've been paying for. And so they're looking around and they're realizing like they can't actually own anything. They can't buy anything. The American dream that their parents were able to afford, they're not able to afford. There are other contributing factors as well. I would say one of those is when women entered the workforce en masse, you doubled the workforce, which means wages are going to drop. And now, because things kind of settled out after that happened, now most families have to really put their heads together and figure it out if they want to have just one working adult in the home. If they want to have just, one person stay home with the kids and the other go out and work. That used to be a possibility, but now a lot of people struggle to do that. And they find that they both have to go out and work full time. So you've got people who are struggling financially, and a young generation that is looking around and building up a lot of resentment. And some of it is very understandable, a lot of economic resentment. And so then you get this charismatic politician who comes along. And because you don't know anything about history, you don't know anything about socialism, you don't know anything about economics, and this guy's telling you, I'm going to make everything free. It's like unicorns and lollipops. Elect me, and I'm going to freeze your rent where landlords can't raise rent. I'm going to have the government take over the grocery stores. That'll fix the prices. I'm going to make buses free and faster somehow. Somebody's going to do that. Nothing is free. Somebody pays for it. Somebody has to pay for the buses, the bus drivers. He says he also promised free childcare to everyone in New York City, free childcare. Who's going to pay for that? Somebody has to pay all those childcare workers. All of these things that he promises to make free, it's a lie. That money is coming from the taxpayer. And one of the ways he tries to justify that, and a lot of these people try to justify it, is by making a scapegoat out of rich people and saying, well, we're just going to tax the rich people. Well, first of all, I don't agree with that on its face, that it doesn't make it any better that they're going in and taking a greater share of the fruits of your labor because you're a wealthy person. But even if let's say you think that's good, let's tax the rich people. There's a couple things to that. Again, throughout history, that scapegoat group always gets larger and larger. If you look at what happened in the Soviet Union with the kulaks, they started off by saying, oh, look at all these wealthy landowners with farms and stuff. We're gonna take all their farms and collectivize them and give all the profits and the food to everyone. And they went in and murdered people and took their farms. And then the scapegoat group, got bigger and bigger until they were murdering and taking the farms of people who, just like a one family operation that had like a little farm, kill them, take their stuff. It got bigger and bigger. This happens every time. And so that scapegoat group is going to expand. If you think it's just billionaires who are getting taxed, you're in for a rude awakening. And the other thing is that when the government comes in and tries to fix prices, it always fails, and it leads to scarcity, and it leads to shortages. And in the end, that means everything becomes more expensive. So for example, let's take the rent freezes, for example. He says he's going to rent freeze 2 million apartments so that landlords cannot raise their rent. So why would anybody become a landlord? Why would anybody build and own apartment buildings and lease them out when they can't see any profits from it, when they're going to be in the hole from doing it? Why would you do that? Why would you build? There are already hundreds of thousands of vacant apartments in New York because the landlords have been priced out. They can't afford to make repairs that are required by the government via regulations. They can't get the buildings up to code, and so they're empty. So there's no incentive there for people to actually be a landlord or to rent apartments or to own buildings. All of those people are going to leave. Do you understand? Like, they're going to leave New York City. They've already said they're leaving. Many of them have already made preparations to leave. That's just one example. I want to play. I was watching some Charlie Kirk videos, some old videos of his from before he was murdered. And I watched one of his interviews with an economics professor from Hillsdale College. And I wanted to show a little bit of this interview because I thought it was great. Hillsdale College is pretty much the only college that I feel comfortable like recommending to parents. I don't know enough about some of the other alternative options, but they do a great job. And I've got this pulled up. We're going to watch just a little bit of it because he can explain it much better than I can. So this is Dr. Charles Steele. He's from Hillsdale. You guys tell me if you can hear this. Oh, it says no. It says my audio stopped. Hold on. Okay. Let's see. Tell me if you guys can hear this.
Steele, director of the Hutchinson Center for Commerce and Freedom and the associate professor of economics at America's greatest college, Hillsdale College. Dr. Steele, great to see you. Thank you so much for taking the time. Dr. Steele, you are also the one that did the Understanding Capitalism course, which is wonderful. that people should check out at charlieforhillsdale.com. Dr. Steele, I want to talk to you about Mamdani. Let's just address one of his ideas. Why would freezing the rent and having government-run grocery stores in New York City be a bad economic idea? Dr. Steele.
Well, thank you very much for the kind words about Hillsdale. We're striving to be the best college in the world, and we're going to do that.
Yes.
We may be there now. So this is an excellent question. I think people really need to understand what socialism is and how it works. Really, it doesn't work, and understand the importance of capitalism and the free enterprise system. So you're asking about rent control. Rent control prevents owners of properties from being able to maintain them. It limits the amount of property that will be made available. It stops building, and it creates shortages. That's also true of any kind of price controls that hold prices down. It creates shortages.
I just want to pause this for a second and say, New York Post always has the best headlines. Look at this headline that's featured on the screen in this interview that Charlie Kirk did with Dr. Steele. It's a New York Post, and it's a picture of Mamdani with Elizabeth Warren, and it says African American meets Native American. These guys are great. Okay.
That's also true of any kind of price controls that hold prices down, attempt to hold prices down. They don't actually do that. They simply create shortages, and then the property will be allocated in some other way. Grocery stores, government grocery stores. I lived in the former Soviet Union. I also lived in communist China for a short time, and I've been in other places where they have government controls on these sorts of things. And if you like shortages and standing in lines and not enough to eat, then government grocery stores are the way to go. That's the quick answer.
So Dr. Steele, let's zero in on the rent control. It's actually, so there are tens of thousands of vacant apartments in New York City right now where he is running, and they do not get improved upon, and they do not have significant upgrades because of rent control. The cities with the most rent control in the United States, without exception, have the highest average housing prices. New York City, San Francisco, DC. And they've had the controls for a long period of time. And so speak more about this, the direct connection between rent controls and freezing the rent and housing prices increasing. It actually hurts the very problem that they are seeking to solve.
Sure. Why would anyone want to invest money? Why would you want to build apartments if you're not going to be able to charge an amount that allows you to recover your costs? And so there's the first problem. There's no point in investing in something where there's no possible return on it. And I mean, it's going to be important that we talk a little bit about capitalism and about profit and why that's important, why that's a valuable thing. But just as a starting point, if you can't recover your cost, you're not going to invest something. People will not invest in building new housing if they're simply going to take a loss on it. And that's what the rent controls do. It's interesting that after the Vietnam War, after the United States had left Vietnam and North Vietnam conquered South Vietnam, one of the North Vietnamese finance ministers said, "We managed to do to housing in Hanoi what the Americans could not do by bombing. We destroyed it, and we destroyed it with rent controls." That's what rent controls do.
And so I know that you're a professor of economics, but it's an irresistible call, the temptation of rent control. Why is it that we're not able to shed ourselves of the political attraction to the allure of rent control despite its tragic and catastrophic failure?
So Mr. Mamdani just recently met with Elizabeth Warren, and Warren has endorsed him, Senator Warren. And she put it this way. She said that we need affordability. And what's attractive is they say, we'll hold prices down. If we hold prices down, it's more affordable, right? Well, actually not so. What you actually do is constrain supply. With less supply, it's less available. Whatever commodity we're talking about, in this case, housing, will be in less supply and therefore be allocated to a number of across the people attempting to get it via some other method, whether it is waiting in line, bribery, special favors, something like this. But there will also be shortages.
Speaking, let me pause this for 1 second. When he talks about how there will be shortages of apartments once you institute more rent control, and then they're going to allocate this very small supply to people based on things. It could be standing in line or bribes or, what they're going to find out ways of how do they allocate this. It's worth pointing out that Mamdani himself is in a rent controlled apartment, despite being from a very wealthy family. His mother is an award-winning Hollywood director. His dad is a professor at Columbia University. Guess what his dad specializes in? Decolonization, a very woke field of study. And so how did this guy with all of this money and resources get one of the few rent controlled apartments in New York City? And I just think that's worth pointing out.
Inevitably, with a system like that, it's attractive because the politician will say, we're going to give you something for free. We're going to give you something that's cheap. It'll be, we're affordable. It won't be available, but boy, the price will be low. And that low price is what allegedly
no one will have
it,
but it will be a very low price. Yeah. There'll be no abundance, but it won't cost very much.
So I thought that was just a really great interview. There were a couple different videos where Charlie Kirk talked about Mamdani. I recommend going and watching all of those. I think he was brilliant on it. Like, he was on a lot of topics. He actually also talked about the economic frustrations of the young generation and how, in his opinion, Republicans needed to start doing a better job of explaining things and explaining what the plan is to help people and to turn things around economically in this country. I would say for parents who have kids, whether they're K through 12 or they're getting ready to go to university, you need to be looking for a school for your kids that is going to teach them the basics, like teach them literacy and math and reading. If you look at the SAT numbers and the literacy rates of kids in public schools, like government schools, versus those who are in private schools or homeschooled or in classical schools, the public schools lag way behind. The public schools have been declining for over 20 years. And I would definitely recommend getting them out of the government schools. It's not just that they're not learning how to read and write and think and learning about history. It's also that they're being indoctrinated with this religion, this woke ideology. Those two things are happening simultaneously. And so young people are not learning what is a right, what are rights. Okay, they're not learning what is communism, what's the history of communism and socialism. They're not learning things like, oh, what is freedom? What does that mean? What is liberty? These questions, these big questions, all play into the acceptance speeches that a lot of the Democrats who won on election night were making. I heard, I believe it was the one in Virginia, or it may have been the one in New Jersey, one of these female governors, these new female governors, she was talking about liberty. And she was pairing that with like collective responsibility, which those two things are at odds. It's like collectivism, but also freedom, collectivism, but also individualism. No. And she was talking about liberty, and I was thinking, and she's talking about freedom. And, a lot of times Democrats or socialists like Mamdani will talk about freedom and liberty. And I'm like, their audience doesn't know what freedom is. Like, they really don't know what freedom is. They can't define it. They can't define what is a right. They will say things like healthcare is a right. No, it's not. It's not. And so we need to go back to the basics, to civics, to history. And it starts when you're young. And if you don't know how to answer these questions, a lot of adults I talk to are not able to answer these questions, and you need to start learning on your own. I had to start learning on my own because, like I said, I went to 2 good schools, great schools, but I did not know how to answer these questions. I realized, like, well, let me look that up. Let me look this up. Let me figure this out. So when Democrats offer you freebies, like free things, those are not rights. That's something that somebody else is paying for you to have. It is not your right. It is not my right to have somebody else pay for my health insurance. That's not a right. It is not my right for the government to force someone else to pay for my childcare. If I have a child, like that's not a right of mine. Like, it's my right. Somebody better pay for my childcare. It's my right. Somebody better pay for my healthcare. It's my right. Somebody better pay for my groceries. No, that is not a right. If you look at the Bill of Rights, these are the way the founders thought about it. These are natural rights that they're endowed by our Creator. They're given to us by our Creator. And these are things that the government has no right to take away from us. A lot of times it's called negative rights. If you go through the Bill of Rights, it's basically like the government doesn't have the right to restrict your speech, to take your speech from you. The government doesn't have the right to disarm you and to prevent you from protecting yourself. They don't have the right to do that. It's basically a whole list of things where it's like the government doesn't have the right to restrict life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. You get to do those things. Those are your rights. If you don't know what rights mean, you're going to be pulled in any direction. Any con artist, anyone who's like, step right up. I've got a new right for you. It's going to be free. I'm going to do this for you. I'm going to make the buses free. That's your right. It's not. I started thinking about freedom a few years ago during the COVID years because I had a conversation with a socialist, a male socialist. He was at a women's rights, they call it a right? A women's rights protest. And they were protesting when Roe v. Wade got overturned. And I and several people from my church went out there and were trying to have conversations with people. And the women who were there would not talk to you. They would just scream. They were like a lot of the leftists you see on TikTok. They were just, they acted like they were possessed. But there was this one guy who was talking with me, and he said he was out there because he cares about women's rights. Well, what does that mean? He cares about women being able to murder a baby in the womb. Okay, let's put that aside for a second. We started talking about the COVID lockdowns and some other things, and he was telling me basically that he's a socialist and that he hates the government, he hates big business. And I said, well, if you hate big business, why did you support the lockdowns during COVID? Because we had just talked about COVID and he supported the lockdowns. I said, why would you support the lockdowns? Because that's big business and government working together to unconstitutionally shut down small businesses and interfere with people's right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So why would you support that? That was the biggest transfer of wealth we've seen from the middle class to the upper class, to these big corporations that were allowed to stay open, right? While small businesses went under because the government overreached. Like the government went and said, we're going to take this right from you. You don't get to open your coffee shop anymore. And he said to me, he supported it, and that he supported the stipends, especially that the government was giving out, and that what he would like to see is for the government to do that full time. Like he wants the government to give us all a check every month to live on. He thinks that's our right. He thinks that we should be getting checks from the government. And this just blew my mind. So I asked him, you just told me you don't trust the government and you don't trust big business, yet you want to trust those people to decide how much of a pittance you get per month. And he said, yeah, because I don't want to have to work anymore. I don't want to work, is what he said. So you want the government to take from those who are working and give to you. And you're okay trusting them with how much that check is going to be. Maybe it's $5 for the month. Who knows what it is, right? You're leaving it in their hands. And so I asked him, like, what do you think freedom is? And he couldn't really answer. And I started thinking about it a lot. And I think freedom, and I kind of said this to him, it was when I was first thinking about it. I was like, freedom is the ability to keep the fruits of your labor and to acquire property. It's private property. It's the things that you own to build a life on. And nobody has a right to take those things from you because you worked for them. It's the fruits of your labor. And isn't it interesting that we live in a time when the government, when the WEF, these global elites are all telling us that by the year 2030, we will own nothing. Their advertising campaign for 2030 is, by the year 2030, you will own nothing and you will be happy. Sounds like messaging to the sheep, right? We're going to take all of this from you. We're going to take your freedom from you. We're going to take your liberty. We're going to take all of your private property. And by gosh, you better be happy about it. It's pretty incredible to me. That socialist I talked to back then, I said to him, but he just couldn't wrap his head around it. I said, don't you understand, like, in this fantasy world you want to live in where you don't have to work and everything is coming up roses and it's like unicorns and lollipops, right? You don't have to work and you get a check from the government. Like, that makes you their slave. It makes everyone their slave. It makes the people who are working so you can get a check slaves, and it makes you a slave because you're dependent upon them for whatever they decide to give you that month. It's a crazy way of thinking. Therese, hey Therese, what's up? She says, look at the EBT crowd wanting to riot. Exactly. I've seen so many of those TikTok videos of people who are upset about the government shutdown affecting their food stamps, their EBT cards, and talking about how they're going to start burning down and rioting because it's their right. It's not your right. It's not your right to have other people pay for your food. We've set up these social programs that are meant to be used temporarily by people as a social safety net when you fall on hard times. And there are people who have fallen on hard times who really need that support system. And then you've got all of these other people abusing the system, which is not fair for those people who really need it when they're struggling. You've got all these people who are living on it like a food stamp card paid for by somebody else's labor, that's their right to have that. It's not. Hey, Sonora, thankful for the founding fathers. Yes. Yeah, the more you read about all the discussions and the debates they were having at the founding, like, the more you start to understand that they were very thoughtful men, and they were very carefully intentioned men. Like, they thought through, they debated, they discussed, they went back and forth on everything. You can read the Federalist Papers, the Anti-Federalist Papers, and understand that they really put a lot of thought into how to restrict the government's power, because they knew it would always tilt towards tyranny, how to restrict that. And this is what we should be. This is what I should have been learning in school. This is what we should all be learning in school. Dan says, it used to be the churches who would help the hungry, not the government. Exactly. So my pastor, Bradley Helgerson at Church on the Square in Georgetown, Texas, he talks a lot about this. He helped me to understand this better. So he talked about the 3 spheres in a functioning society. You've got these 3 different institutions. The institution of the family, that's like the smallest building block for a healthy society, is to have a healthy family. And then you've got the church, which should be advising the family and the state on issues of morality, if it's functioning correctly and not corrupt, right? You've got the church, and then you've got the state, the government, whose job is to protect the citizens, to have a standing army, to protect the borders, and to enforce the law. That's really what all the federal government's supposed to be doing. And what's happened, when you start to understand that there's these three different domains that are responsible for different things, the function of the family is to do child rearing, is to raise healthy kids, is to raise a healthy, like, next generation. But the family is completely failing. There have been attacks on the family for decades. And the church, who's supposed to be offering moral instruction to the family and to the state, the church has also been failing. It was infiltrated by a bunch of people who are practicing a completely different religion, the woke religion. And for a long time, I think Christians perhaps were afraid of standing up and saying, this is what we believe. This is the truth. This is God's truth about certain things. Hopefully that's ending. Hopefully Christians are now feeling more comfortable saying, hello, the house is on fire. We need to talk about it. And so because the church and the family were failing, or maybe this all happened in conjunction, the government started getting into their domains. The government's like, we're not just going to be the government. We're also going to be the church. We're going to enforce morality. That's what the government started doing. We're going to enforce morality. That's what the DEI stuff is. That's what the CRT is in the government schools. They're enforcing their upside down woke morality through the government. That's what social credit scores are going to be. So they started trying to do the job of the church and the family. They're like, we're going to do child rearing. We're going to take your kids away from you if you don't pretend they're a different gender than what they really are. Like, we're going to take your kids. It's out of whack. We need to constrain the government. Wicked Sykes says, my town's food pantry is overstocked in case it's needed, and we added 2 more locations to donate food. This is how it should be. We need to go back to people knowing that they can go to their church, or they can go to like a local church or a food pantry, and they will not go hungry. It is the job of the church to take care of widows and orphans. Like, that is the job, one of the jobs. Yes, Texas Sheep Lady, you guys are, we're on the same page, I think. She says, and now the church has the opportunity to step into that role of charity again. Yes. I agree. AH says, actually, family and church were never failing. The government created policies and regulations to jump in and pretend to be the hero. I think you're probably right, AH. I should probably amend the way I talked about that. I think you're probably right. I think they probably expanded and justified their intrusion into those spheres by saying, you need us. You need the government to be your daddy. Dan Trainer, a movement away from God, then government becomes what they worship. Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm going to keep this one short today. I'll wrap it up. I don't know what's going to happen in New York, but I know it's not going to be good. I know there will be shortages. I know that things are going to get less safe. That Uber driver I mentioned who said it's already not safe on the subways for his wife and daughters. We talked about what's going to happen with free buses. If he is able to make buses free, it's going to be roving homeless shelters and drug addict shelters, so things are going to get less safe. Cops are leaving, businesses are leaving. A lot of Jewish people are leaving. People are going to be fleeing New York City. A lot of the entrepreneurs, people who create jobs, are going to be leaving. Why would they stay? You're talking about targeting wealthy people. If you're a wealthy person who's created a business, why would you stay? And I've heard that some of these business owners are saying it's not just their decision, that their employees are saying, please, let's move. Can you move the headquarters to Florida? Please. So they're going to be leaving. You guys are talking about Rumble rants. I can't see them for some reason. There must be something going on with Rumble today. Let me see if I can go over there and see them before I leave. I know that Texas and Florida, like there's some different cities like Houston, for example, that have been offering incentives for the cops who are leaving New York to come to Houston or to Florida. So there are other like more based states that are trying to recruit, that are like, okay, well, if you're leaving, we could use this kind of person, this kind of person, this kind of person, you know, if you want to come here. Oh, I see them. Jay Thomas for $5 says, years ago on Savage Nation, Michael Savage explained it well. The government should maintain peace, protect property rights, and enforce contracts. That's a great way of phrasing it. Thank you so much, John Thomas. Maintain peace, protect property rights, and enforce contracts. He also says for $5, stop calling them socialists. Socialism has always been the intermediary stop to communism. They are all Marxists. Mundumi quoted founder of one of American Communist parties. Yes, this is a great point. I just didn't want to get too far into it today or muddy the waters, because in case there are any people on the left watching. But yes, socialism is always the intermediary step to communism. The goal of socialism is to get to communism. That's what it is. You're exactly right. They're all Marxists. This 2-volume set of books that I have from Epoch Times about the history of communism gets right to that at the beginning. It's a great book set. Okay, I think I got them all. Well, thank you guys so much. I am keeping it short today because the microphone is kaput and we're using the temporary one, but also because I've been baking. We have a meal train going for 2 different families at church, and today was my day to bake. So I've been making pasties, and I got to go deliver them to these 2. We have 2 new babies in our church. It's amazing, and so yeah, I got to get to that. And I really am glad to be back. I'm glad to see some familiar faces in the chat. It's good to see you guys. And I am going to get a new microphone before Monday. So we'll be back with the better sound on Monday. But thanks for being here. If you didn't get a chance to watch it yet, I did post one of the short interviews I did with NTD News. And it's on the channel now. You can watch it. I think it was like a 14 or 15 minute interview if you want to go and check it out. And I appreciate any feedback that you have for me in doing that kind of speaking. So thank you for being here. And I will see you guys on Monday. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.